terrorists? Is it ever the right thing to do? After the brutal murdering of another British man, a man sent out to work to enhance the lives of people suffering in countries like Iraq and Syria. Alan Henning, murdered by the Islamic State. Is it ever right that we negotiate with these people? Other countries seem to. Should we? I'll lighten it up in a minute as well. Nick Clegg yesterday at the Lib Dem conference in Glasgow has been followed everywhere he's been. His every move tracked by journalists in the papers. And one thing the journalists noticed while they were following him around was that he got changed rather a lot. 4 outfit changes yesterday for Nick Clegg. He started the day in a very smart suit. And then he moved on, and by the end of the day, he was dressed a bit like Steve Jobs, the former Apple boss, in scruffy trainers and a top. 4 outfit changes. Is someone struggling to work out what the right social context is? We'll discuss that a bit more in a bit more detail later, but it really struck me that there's a certain amount of playing to the cameras going on, perhaps. Anyway, it's 9:37 now. David Davis is the MP for Halton Price and Howden. He's a former Shadow Home Secretary and a minister with the Foreign Office in the 1990s, and he's got his own very personal experience of dealing with terrorists. David, morning.
Good morning. I thought you were going to ask me about negotiating with Nick Clegg.
Well, that's probably very difficult in its own way, isn't it? How many times have you changed outfit when you've been at conference?
Not enough.
So, listen, tell me your story. This is in 1994, so to take you back 20 years, tell me about the time you negotiated with a terrorist organisation to release a hostage.
Well, it was... we didn't negotiate with them. Just the reverse. In fact, they all ended up dead. There was a young soldier who was the assistant military attaché in Bogota, a corporal, not a very high-ranking chap, and he went, of all things, he went bird watching out in the badlands of Colombia, and he was lifted by a terrorist group, and they wanted a ransom for him. It was a straightforward commercial operation on their part, and it happens in Colombia a lot. At the time, I think there were about 70 Americans being held hostage, and over the course of 4 or 5 months, in essence, we tracked them down. There was a gunfight, and we got him back. But in the middle of it, of course, there was lots of pressure to pay a ransom. The family in particular, quite understandably. I mean, the family were beside themselves with worry, and they wanted to pay. They even, I think, tried to sort of sell a car and various things to raise money. And we actually, as far as we could, prevented that, stopped it. We stopped the agency working for them, paying any ransoms, because it's absolutely, for good reason, against British government policy. We've never ever paid, and never should. And it will stop it happening. Now, you can understand why the young soldier's mum and dad and his wife were terrified as to what might happen to him, and they weren't to know that eventually we'd get him back, albeit after 4 months of pretty intensive military effort.
And the captors ended up dead?
Yeah, not at our hands. I mean, what happened was the Colombian security forces killed them all in the end. But that was after we got our soldier back and withdrawn from the country.
So a joint effort where effectively the might and military force wins.
Yeah. Although there were plenty of times we didn't think it would. I mean, there was one weekend when there'd been a contact. We bumped into them, and the terrorists sent a message back to us that if we didn't withdraw, they would try and execute, their own words, their hostage for military crimes. They're unspecified. And we had to make a decision. Did we stay and continue and take the risk of them doing that, or withdraw? Well, the answer was we stayed. And as I say, eventually we got him back.
So thinking about that situation and that experience that you were involved in personally, can you draw any parallels? Is there anything that you can tell the world about the way IS is dealing with its terrorists?
Well, IS is a mixture of things. I mean, it's for a start, it's a sadistic and psychopathic organisation, but it also is a commercial organisation. It makes millions of pounds out of this. So in that sense, there is a parallel with Colombia. In Colombia, you had organisations who, on the one hand, in those days were Marxist, but they made the money which allowed them to continue by taking and then selling back hostages.
How is IS making money? What's it doing?
Well, it's doing the same. It does sell back some of these hostages, and one of the problems that a number of European countries in particular do pay for hostages. They pay to get them back. They pay ransoms.
What kind of money are we talking?
Oh, you're talking millions normally. And you see the same thing in the other extreme in real commercial terms in Somalia, with the pirates taking whole ships and the crews with them, and then selling them back. And if once somebody pays, a criminal organisation is set up, and it effectively continues, because the incentive there is to make money which most of these people could never see ever, millions and millions of pounds or dollars. And then once somebody's paid, that's it. The situation is set up, and it's very, very hard to stop. Now, IS has got hundreds of millions of pounds or dollars in its bank account, partly, not entirely, but partly through this sort of mechanism.
Partly as well through the fallout of the organisation of Iraq. Lots of American dollars floating around there, supposedly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is said they got $1 billion. I can't actually prove that, but that's what the public domain data says.
Some would argue if they have that kind of money through American blundering that's fallen into their hands anyway, an extra 10, 20 million here and there isn't going to make an awful lot of difference if they're already very well militarily equipped.
Well, it won't change instantaneously the circumstance with IS. Of course it won't. But it does. It keeps the incentive there to take more hostages. And that's one of the problems. When you pay $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is out to get somebody back, you may save that one person, but you then put at risk hundreds, even thousands of other people who will then, one after another, get lifted. Now, let's not be too prissy about this. There are countries that deal with terrorism all the time who do deals with hostages. The Israelis have traded prisoners for hostages, and they're nobody's patsies. And actually, only a few months ago, the Americans traded some prisoners for an American hostage and got hugely criticised. Obama got hugely criticised for it. I think you should never do it. I think it's a very, very unfortunate road to go down, but it's entirely understandable. I mean, when we were dealing with the Colombian situation, I could understand that the family of the young corporal were beside themselves, absolutely beside themselves, that their son was never going to come back.
Well, you only need to put yourself in the shoes of Barbara Henning, who no doubt would have done anything, would have moved mountains and traded any amount of material item to get her beloved husband back.
Yeah, and of course it's much worse there because of the nature of it, the way they kill them, the complete sadism of their whole approach to this. So in many ways, in one case you imagine what's going on. In this case, you can virtually see it if you can bring yourself to look.
The method of it strikes me as barbaric and medieval, married up with using cutting-edge social media techniques to disseminate this to as wide an audience as possible. The message is very clear. How do you deal with that kind of organisation on that kind of level?
First thing you've got to, each one is different. I'll talk in a second about how you deal with IS. But the thing to understand about the Islamic State is that, as you say, they're using cutting-edge social media. It is done not by a small splinter group. It is done with the authority of the religious council and the state council of IS. It is carefully organised, and it is to a purpose. And apart from the issue of raising money, the purpose of it, to a very large extent, is to provoke the West into reacting. Understand that if IS gets itself into a fight with the United States, that in itself is a way of radicalising young Muslims in the Middle East and indeed in other countries around the world, and that's what they're trying to do.
And where do you go from there? Do you have to wipe them off the face of the earth?
You have to defeat them militarily. There's no two ways about it. Whether that involves us going in is a different matter. I mean, the people who are in position to defeat ISIS or ISIL are the forces on the ground, the Iraqi army. The Iraqi army is at least 20 times as big as them, and is at least as well equipped as they are. We've equipped it with enormous amounts of kit and training. The problem you have on the ground there is the government. The government of Iraq does not represent properly all the people of Iraq. You've got Kurds, you've got Shia, you've got Sunni, you've got various tribal distinctions, and the government is not set up in a way to pay proper attention to these people. Malaki, the previous head, was terrible at this and actually helped really create this situation. But even the current ones aren't doing enough. So the first thing we have to do is to say to them, in terms, you want us to help you with money, air support and the rest, you've got to sort yourselves out. And that means being properly representative of the people on the ground. Otherwise, you won't get the Sunnis to fight for you. It's the Sunnis that matter here. Once you've done that, and that's a single pretty fierce conversation, you then have got to get the Iraqi army itself out on the ground. Only at that point is there any point to bombing and to doing other things, maybe using special forces, whatever. But you've got to get the army on the ground to fight. If it doesn't, you can't win this.
On a deeper level, if you defeat these people militarily, you don't necessarily defeat the ideology, do you? And that is perhaps at the core of this, that there is this hardline ideology which will, like a virus of thought, continue to spread.
Well, it's two things together. It's the ideology and it's the vacuum into which it can go. I mean, ISIS is almost a living experiment in this. Before ISIS was on the ground, there was an organization called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the AQI. It was a very nasty organization run by a vicious Jordanian. And what the West did, in one of the biggest, well, not one of, the biggest and most effective special forces operation in history, was to eradicate that organization. We didn't just degrade it, we bumped off the leader, we bumped off most of the individuals who ran it, we broke it up, and it ceased to exist. It was in the strategic space that ISIS now occupies. But because we didn't fix the politics, because we didn't actually get the government of Iraq to do their job, represent the Sunnis, represent the Kurds and so on, what happened was ISIS was able to move back into that same strategic space. It's an absolute textbook demonstration of the fact that you cannot solve this just by military action. You've got to do it as a pincer. You've got to do it, one half of the pincer being military, but the other half of the pincer being political and ideological. And on the ground, I'm not talking back here. We've got problems, but out there on the ground, you've got to do it with both halves of the pincer.
Very interesting to talk to you this morning, David. Just a closing question. I'll put this out there from John in Scunthorpe. He has a dilemma for you. He says if it was a high-ranking person who'd been captured, let's say it was a senior military figure or perhaps a member of the royal family, would the British government then pay a ransom?
No, it shouldn't do. Well, whether they would?
Shouldn't do.
Shouldn't.
But would it?
Yeah, it shouldn't do. I don't care if it was me. I don't care if it was anybody. I don't care. They should not pay a ransom under any circumstances. Move heaven and earth to get them back, but not by paying either a ransom or a trade to of any sort, like prisoners.
Very interesting to talk to you.
Otherwise, it'll happen again.
Very interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. David Davis, the MP for